I have two shocking facts to start this video off with. One of them is that Planes somehow got a sequel called Planes Fire and Rescue, and the second fact is that Planes the video game got a sequel as well. Now, something that I will admit took me a lot longer to realise than it should have is that the Planes films are not made by Pixar, they are in fact made by Disney Toon Studios, which says enough. Anyway, Planes Fire and Rescue launched in July 2014 to very mixed reviews.
So, mixed, let's call it mixed reviews.
The first film was about racing, and this film is described as an action disaster film, which is not the direction I saw this franchise going in. In fact, in all honesty, I didn't see the franchise going in any direction. The film actually wasn't a complete flop. On a budget of $50 million, it made $147 million back. It's not quite the success of the first film, which had the same budget but made $240 million, and Cars made $462 million against a $120 million budget. So it's probably not the high funds that Disney were hoping for, and would probably explain why the franchise has been dead ever since. Anyway, enough about the movie's backstory. That takes us to the release of Planes Fire and Rescue the video game in November 2014. This game was released exclusively for Nintendo platforms, so that's the Nintendo Wii, Wii U, and the 3DS. I'd be willing to bet that they definitely sold more copies of this game for the Wii than they did the Wii U and 3DS. Anyway, if you remember, I was actually quite positive regarding the original Planes video game. It wasn't perfect, it was quite easy, but above all else, it was pretty fun. Flying about different levels, performing stunts and racing was pretty cool, I have to say. Which meant I had not high hopes, but was quietly hopeful for the follow-up game. And oh boy, if I've learnt one lesson today, it's to stop getting excited for movie tie-in games because I consistently keep getting let down.
You're a fucking disappointment.
So, unlike a lot of movie-based tie-in games, this game actually just follows the plot of the film pretty much completely. Although you wouldn't really know it because the game just drops you into the training to fight fires and whatnot without any actual reason as to why you're doing it. Obviously within the film there is a context as to why Dusty ends up doing this, but here he's just there for no reason. So if you want to find out, watch the film or read the plot on IMDb. The best part of the first Planes game was the flying and the perspective of which you could fly from. In this one, it's almost 2.5D, it's a bit of a weird perspective that you control Dusty from. It's almost top down, with a little bit of leeway of flying up and down as well as left and right. I don't know, I didn't enjoy the perspective this game was played from, although I do understand it was designed like this to make the game easier for kids. Because you're going to have to be scooping down into water, lifting back up to drop on fires, which is not something you had to do in the first game and probably would have been a bit more difficult. Now, to get a picture of why this game turned out why it did, we have to look towards who developed it. And the answer to that is a developer called Little Orbit. You may not have heard of them, but in the time between 2010 and 2015, they've developed so many tie-in games for many different properties, including Barbie, Monster High, How to Train Your Dragon, Planes of course, Penguins of Madagascar, Young Justice, Kung Fu Panda, and even Adventure Time. Now, a lot of these games are either just average or outright terrible, so it's unsurprising that Planes Fire and Rescue has turned out the way that it has. So let's talk about problem number one. The lack of variety in this game is insane. Once you've done 4 or 5 of the training missions, or like 2 of the story missions, you've basically played the entire game. Which was actually an issue I had with the first game, but at least the gameplay itself was a bit more entertaining. There are a total of 9 playable characters that you will use throughout these challenges and story missions, and they each serve one purpose, basically. Aside from Dusty, all the playable characters in this film are all new characters from that film, as opposed to bringing back any characters from the first. Although, they aren't in the film either, so I guess that makes sense. Anyway, the mission variety. Yeah, not great. There are 30 training and academy missions and 12 separate fire and rescue story missions. And as I say, once you've done a few, you've done them all. They all boil down to the same thing. You put out fires, guide lost camper vans, airlift hikers, and that's pretty much it. Also, just as a side note, using the term hiking in the Cars universe I just think is inherently quite funny. Now, you can actually skip the academy and training missions and go straight to the story missions, but then you've got even less of an already short game to play. You'll be done with it in like an hour or two. On top of having very little variety and quite boring missions, the controls themselves are also just quite boring. Dusty handles a bit awkwardly. He's kind of janky and quite slow turning, which is weird for quite a small, agile little plane. And whilst the controls themselves, they aren't awkward, it's not like they're difficult to grasp, it just doesn't feel very natural to do. Some of the other planes, such as Dipper, handle a little bit better because they're supposed to be more agile. It's nice when you do get to play as these characters, but they're only in very small preset sections, and Dipper you play as very little because they just do the exact same thing as Dusty, just a little bit quicker. The only real breakup in the gameplay comes from the smoke jumpers, which are the bunch of construction vehicles that are actually on the ground with wheels, so at least it's some variety from flying. It's just a shame that their gameplay segments essentially boil down to a bunch of quick time events like spam the B button, turn your stick 360 degrees, stuff like that. It's not very exciting, but it's a welcome addition to just controlling Dusty all the time. The missions themselves are kind of similar in completion as they were in the first Planes game. They are broken down into bronze, silver, or gold in terms of your completion, and this is basically just based on the time that you complete the missions in. There's nothing inherently wrong with a medal system, but if you're going to go for gold, you need to make it worthwhile. The only thing you really get from being a completionist is just a bunch of stills from the actual film. Like, not even clips anymore. We've actually downgraded as time has progressed to just fucking stills. Like, come on, if that doesn't scream half-baked lazy game, I don't know what does. So, one thing that worked really well in the first Planes game was the variety of locations you had to go to complete missions and races in. The issue with this game, and of course the film because it's only set in one place, is that the game is also set in just one place. And that place is the Piston National Park.
He did what in his cup?
The thing with this game and its backdrop is, you can tell that this was primarily developed for the Wii and then ported to the Wii U and upscaled ever so slightly. At least that's what it feels like. I know they all released at the same time, but it was definitely developed with the Wii in mind. And because of this, it doesn't look ugly, it just looks really generic. And the problem is, when your entire game is set in this one place, you just have a really boring colour palette of really dreary brown and dark green. The only real variation to this is when the missions are set at night, and then it's even darker, but at least it's slightly different. Realistically, the game should have taken Dusty and the crew across the world to do different save missions, rather than just in the one same place. But that's fine, this is what we've got, this is what we'll make do with. Whilst the world itself isn't exactly the prettiest thing, the character models are all still pretty well done. They all look like they've pretty much been taken straight out of the film. However, the game's quality really does show, because any story you do get given is basically just through text boxes. There's no cutscenes. Like, seeing as the game is following the film, you could have just taken some clips from the film and put them in the game. Because the game didn't even come out before the film, it came out on the film's home release. But instead, characters just occasionally speak with lines ripped from the film, and it doesn't even match what they're saying in the text boxes. It's just lazy. I don't know exactly how long the development cycle for this game was, but I'm willing to bet it was not very long at all. It's giving me major Cars 3 Driven to Win vibes, I have to say. Now, one thing I did like about this game at first was the soundtrack. It has the same kind of epic orchestral vibes as the theme to the first game does, except it's literally like the only song in the whole game, so they just loop it over and over. So when you've heard it after like the first few times, it just starts to get really annoying. Interestingly enough, I couldn't even find the soundtrack to the game anywhere online. The film's OST is available everywhere, but I cannot find anything for this game, so the music in this video I've just taken straight from the first game instead. Thankfully, you can turn both the music and the voice lines off in this game because they're both very repetitive after a while. Surely the developers knew this and that's why they added the setting in, like, just put some more effort in, guys, please. Now, the original Planes movie to me was essentially just the first Cars film, but with planes, and on that topic, I'd say Planes 2 has the weird directional take that Cars 2 also had. It just goes in some random direction that you don't expect. Don't get me wrong, it's not quite to the extreme length that Cars 2 did, but if there ever was a Planes 3, maybe they'll go back to racing and they'll retire Dusty with some horrific crash. However, unlike the Cars 2 game, the Planes 2 game, I have to say, is not good. It's playable in very short bursts, and of course is definitely intended for a much younger audience, so if you're looking for a plane game with firefighting and rescue, just wait for the next edition of Microsoft Flight Simulator, because they're definitely doing all of that in that game instead. Yeah, it will probably take up like your entire computer or console space, but hey, at least you'll have more fun. Anyway, that's all I've got time for today, so thank you very much for watching this video about Planes, Fire and Rescue, the video game. I hope it excited you as much as it did me. Who knows? Did you have this game? Did you play it? What did you think of this game and the film? I'm curious really, because the reviews aren't great. As always, thank you very much. Please don't forget to like this video, subscribe and tap the bell for future upload notifications. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.
Let's keep up the pace. Avalanche, blackout, move, move, move.
See that?
Let's go, let's go.